The member for Ryan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. As well as substantial tax cuts for individuals and families, will the Treasurer please remind the House how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan builds on our proven track record of delivering tax cuts for Australian businesses, and is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Ryan for his question, acknowledge his experience as a Brisbane City Councillor, Mr Speaker, indeed as the Treasurer of the Brisbane City Council, and in his electorate, 60,000 taxpayers are getting a tax cut as a result of policies that we have supported on this side of the House. Now, Mr Speaker, in every electorate represented across this chamber, small businesses are the lifeblood of local communities. They are also the engine room of local economies. 3.6 million small businesses across Australia employ 8 million Australians. That's more than half the workforce being supported by small businesses, Mr Speaker. And we have supported small businesses throughout this crisis, whether it was JobKeeper, the cash flow boost, the most recent business support payments in those states that went into lockdown. And today we released new Treasury analysis and ATO data that showed, as a result of the tax cuts that we on this side of the House have supported, small businesses are getting $5 billion of tax relief this year and next. So if you're a small business with a $500,000 turnover, you're going to be $50,000 better off, around $50,000 better off. And what was also important to acknowledge in this new data is that small and medium-sized businesses have created 600,000 jobs between April last year and September this year. That's 1,300 jobs a day being created by small business. Now, you would think with that track record of creating jobs and supporting economic activity that those opposite would support small business. But we know that the only thing that they've got for small business is a sledgehammer, Mr Speaker, higher taxes for small businesses. And we know that the Labor Party and the member for Rankin recently took a plan to put a new tax on family small businesses to his shadow cabinet, Mr Speaker, to his shadow cabinet. And what would that do? It would put a tax on 300,000 small businesses. So if you've got a mum and dad cafe that earns $150,000 a year in that cafe, they will pay an extra $14,000 of tax as a result of Labor's higher taxes on small business. So, Mr Speaker, while we're supporting small businesses with JobKeeper, the cash flow boost and other COVID support payments, those opposite are waiting for small businesses with a higher tax.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How can the Treasurer make the sorts of claims he just did in that answer when the two highest taxing governments of the last 30 years have both been Liberal governments, including his?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Rankin welcoming back to the parliament the part-time shadow over shadow Treasurer, because that was a Dorothy Dixon, Mr Speaker, because at the last election we were proposing lower taxes for Australians and Labor was proposing $387 billion of higher taxes. And do you know who said they were proud and pleased of the housing tax and the retirees tax? Who?
Sneaky Jim.
The member for Rankin. The member for Rankin. The co-architect with the member for McMahon. And you know what the member for McMahon told the Australian people about Labor's high taxing agenda? If you don't like it, don't vote for it, Mr Speaker. If you don't like it, don't vote for it. So the member for Rankin has the hide to come to the dispatch box knowing that he took to the Australian people a superannuation tax. He took to the Australian people a higher tax on housing. He took to the Australian people a retirees tax. He took to the Australian people higher taxes on your income, and he took to the Australian people higher taxes on small business. Mr Speaker, A leopard doesn't change their spots. They know what the member for Rankin is all about. Higher taxes on all Australians.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is also to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House of how the Morrison government's strong record of cutting taxes for Australian families and workers so that they can keep more of what they earn? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Robertson for a question. Acknowledge that she's a strong advocate for lower taxes for the people across her electorate, with more than 50,000 taxpayers in her electorate getting a tax cut as a result of policies supported and implemented by the Morrison government. Now, Mr Speaker, when we got elected, we said to the Australian people we would grow the economy. We said to the Australian people we would cut their taxes, Mr Speaker, and we said to the Australian people we would create more jobs. Now, after the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression, the Australian economy today is $300 billion bigger than when we came to government. $300 billion bigger than when we came to government. And we have legislated through the parliament $300 billion of tax cuts for households, Mr Speaker. $300 billion for tax cuts for households. We've introduced the biggest business investment incentives Australia has ever seen, and we've reduced small business company tax rates down to the lowest level in 50 years. That's our record. And when it comes to jobs, there are 1.4 million additional Australians in work today than when we came to government. That is our record. And our economic plan helped put Australia in a strong position going into this crisis. Our economic plan helped get Australia through this crisis. And our economic plan will help ensure our economy is stronger on the other side of this crisis. Now, I'm asked, are there any alternative approaches? Well, we know what the Labor Party's plan is because they showed us at the last election. Now, on the weekend, the member for Rankin went on the program Insiders, and David Spears asked the member for Rankin a very simple question. The question was, would you increase taxes for ordinary Australians at all? Simple yes, no question. Would you increase taxes for ordinary Australians at all? What did the member for Rankin say? It makes sense to maintain some flexibility, Mr Speaker. To maintain some flexibility. Some flexibility to increase your taxes on income
Member
earners.
for Rankin.
Some flexibility to increase some taxes on your superannuation. Some flexibility to increase taxes on retirees, Mr Speaker. Some flexibility to increase taxes on housing, Mr Speaker. And, of course, some flexibility to increase taxes on family businesses. You see, a leopard doesn't change their spots, Mr Speaker. The member for Rankin, the leader of the opposition, they're only interested in one thing.
The Treasurer's time has concluded. The member